Okay, morning everyone, and what I've got today is the start of the build of my Trex 500X. It's taken me pretty much a day to get everything prepared. So I've got all the kit ready, the instructions, the Align Trex 500X instructions. I've sourced all the tools that I'll need, they're all laid out. And what I wanted to show is what I always do is I put a white sheet on the floor, because I've spent many an hour looking for screws when they've dropped on the floor, and I've had to use magnets before now, but I find by putting the sheet, a nice white sheet, the screws are black or silver and they do tend to show up quite nicely. I've got a cutting board and a nice clean towel for my preparation surface, and I'm starting on the first step, which is pretty much taking the rotor head apart and then checking everything and re-greasing and thread locking everything, the thrust bearings. So it comes already assembled. You can see there the swash plate in the bag, but you know, it's got to be taken apart, degreased, and then put back together. Now, I'm not set up for doing full build videos, but what I'm going to try and do is, as I go through the build, just do sort of like progress reports and try and give people advice on things that they should look out for if I find any mistakes in the manual, because sometimes there are little mistakes. But hopefully it's a complicated build, but it should be pretty much straightforward. I have built a number of helis now, so I'll report back when, you know, I've completed the first stages. So see you soon. Okay then, so an update. So first problem, okay, I've taken the head apart, and you can see there I've laid out the thrust race on the one side of the rotor head, and when I came to take the screw out there, I couldn't budge it, so I pulled the feathering shaft out. Now if you ever have a problem like that, what happens is when you put the screw in the other end and you tighten it and then you try to loosen that side, then what you do is you just loosen the screw on this side. So what I did was, using a vise, I clamped the shaft in the vise with cardboard, because what you don't want to do is damage the feathering shaft at all. You know, you don't want to get any marks or damage on that shaft. And then with things like those screws there, because it was stuck, what I did was just clamped it in the vise and applied heat, and kept applying heat until I could finally then get the screw to come out. So first problem, happens quite a lot when you're taking these things apart. They shouldn't have put that screw in as tight as well they have. There's definitely not thread lock on it, but as I said, you know, these screws get gunked up with machining fluid when they're produced. So, you know, take your time, make sure you don't damage the shaft, and then methodically lay it out. And obviously once you've done that, then you're ready then to reassemble it with grease. Now with the thrust race, you've got to be careful, because with the cups that go on the bearing, you've got to make sure that the cup side of the bearing is full of grease and that faces inwards. And then one of these little washers says out, so that's for the outside, and one of them says in, and that's for the inside, and they are marked on them in and out. And you need to make sure that you've got all the correct spacers. Apply the grease to the cup side of the thrust race, and that goes in, because with centrifugal force you don't want the grease to come out of the shaft that way. You want the grease to stay in the thrust race. I use thrust race grease, but you've got to be careful. This is an alloy head, so it's okay, but with some helicopters with plastic heads, you've got to be very, very careful what grease you use, because some grease can damage plastic. But I'm using molybdenum thrust race grease, and because this is a metal head, it'll be fine. In this part you'll have little dampers there, one's just fallen out. what I find is best to use silicone grease on those so it doesn't cause any damage. So quick update, and you know, like to warn of any potential problems that people might come across when they're taking the kit apart. And now I'm going to get back on with the assembly. Okay then, so I've finished assembling the thrust races in the head, and what you should check for is that it's nice and smooth in both directions, that it rotates smoothly, and that there's no lateral play at all. I mean, it doesn't have to be really over tightened. I mean, I find that I just use 2 Allen wrenches and I just do it as tight as I can, and I've never had any problems. So nice and smooth, both directions, no lateral play, and you know, everything should be good to go. Just take your time to make sure that you get the thrust races in the correct direction so as the grease doesn't throw out with centrifugal force, and make sure then that you've got the thrust race covers that are marked in and out in the correct placements and direction, and you should be good to go. Now what I wanted to just show was that just a little bit of a guide to thread locking, but it's hard because obviously I haven't got anybody to hold the camera while I'm filming. What I tend to do is I just tend to put a little tiny bit of thread lock on the end, just the first couple of threads, and then I just run the screw in my fingers just to run the thread lock up the thread. I'm using blue thread lock because if you want to ever get the screws back out, then that's what you need to use. So don't use anything that's more permanent. So I just run the screw then in my hands just to get the thread lock up the thread, and you'll find that they'll hold. When you need to remove blue thread lock, then if you just add a bit of heat, if you find they're stubborn to come out, you can just add a little bit of heat and they normally come out straight away. So there you go, nice smooth rotor head. Main blade holders are rotating very nice and smooth, and as I said, no lateral play. Okay, so I finished the rotor head now, and I've got the radius arms on. Obviously it's going into metal, so it had to be cleaned and then thread locked. Not too much thread lock because you don't want to get any thread lock into the little bearings that are in the radius arm and the washout arms as well. And then I've taken each ball link out, degreased it, and then put it back, cleaned it and put it back in with thread lock. Same process really, don't over tighten. It's very easy to strip these metal balls going into aluminium, so just a little tiny bit of thread lock in the start of the threads, run it up with your fingers, put it in, don't over tighten. What I do is I just go through, I did the outer ring first, one by one, and then the inner ring, so I make sure that each ball is thread clean, thread locked, and then tightened. So a couple of hours work, but there you go. Pleased that the first part of the heli build is okay, apart from that screw that was stuck in the feathering shaft. Everything else was fantastic. Okay, I finished step 4, which was fixing the swash plate and the rotor head onto the main shaft, and you can see that everything is moving freely. Very difficult to actuate this and film with one hand, but I just wanted to show you that I completed another step. Everything was straightforward, everything went together perfectly, and you know, looks very nice, very nice quality. So there you go, on to the next stage. Okay then, last update for this first video. I've decided that I'm just gonna do the build in parts, and I've decided that I'm gonna stop now because I'm getting old and I can't concentrate as much as I used to, and I get cramp in my fingers if I try to do too much. but you can see now that pretty much the main frames are together with all the bearing blocks in as well. A little bit sketchy in places, the instructions. It's very difficult to you know, see exactly which way they've got the bearings. You've got to be very, very careful because some bearings face up, some bearings face down. And when you put the main frames and the bearing blocks together, what's very important is that you can slide your main shaft in and it doesn't catch, and it can just slide in from the top to the bottom, you know, and once it's in the main frame then that it rotates nice and freely. What I tend to do is I put the frames and all the bearing blocks in, but I don't tighten the screws, and then I put it on. I'll just move the instructions. I put it on a perfectly flat surface then, flat level surface, and then make sure that, as I said, the main shaft will pass through the bearing block and it doesn't get caught, and that it spins nice and freely. So there you go, very, very nice quality kit. It's going together quite nice, apart from the only problem I've had so far was, as I explained earlier on this morning, the feathering shaft. And you know, it is really, really nice quality. It's just having a little bit of experience to know that sometimes, you know, when screws won't come out from metal or aluminium, just a little bit of gentle heat and they tend to free up then. So what could have been sort of like a big problem, I've experienced it before, and you know, I was able to sort it out quite quickly without damaging the feathering shaft. So I've done 6 stages. Unfortunately, all these screws that you see with these little red washers, all these screws are going into metal. Once everything is square and everything is in place, and then it's on this landing gear, which is the next stage, what I do then is making sure that, as I said, the main shaft travels through the bearings nice and smoothly. I then painstakingly take out each screw, clean it in alcohol, clean the residue off, thread lock it and put it back in, and I just work through each side systematically, taking out each screw one at a time, take it out, clean it, thread lock it, put it back in. That way then I'm not going to twist the frame. That's the way I've always done it. It is painstaking, it does take a long time, but I've always been able to keep the main frame construction nice and square. So yeah, moving along nicely and enjoying the build so far. As I've said, I can't build for as long as I used to because I just suffer with cramp in my fingers, and obviously my eyesight's not as good as it used to be, so I'm wearing glasses and it tends to give me a little bit of a headache. But you can see now, as I'm going through the build, I'm getting a nice pile of plastic bags that are empty of their parts, and that's what tends to happen. So you'd be surprised, you know, once you start putting things together, how quickly you get through the build. Okay, so that's the end of part 1. Thank you for watching. There you go. So from me and the Trex 500X, see you on part 2. Bye.